Good afternoon, and welcome everyone on today's seminar on technology and happiness. This event would be the first one organized by the Happiness Foundation, and it's going to be the first of a set of monthly seminars following the success of the Happiness Festival we organized last year. My name is Kristina Jadlowski. I'm a research analyst at Happiness Foundation and also an experimental psychology student at the University of Oxford. I will be chairing today's panel, and it is my pleasure to welcome our three amazing speakers: Tristan Elizabeth Gribbin, the founder and CEO of Flow Meditations; David Pearce, an eminent figure of the transhumanist movement and the co-founder of Humanity Plus; and Sandberg, a researcher at the Future of Humanity Institute in Oxford and focusing on management of low probability, high impact risks and estimating the capabilities of future technologies. Thank you very much again for joining us today. Today's discussion is going to consist of two parts. At first, I'm going to ask some questions to the individual speakers, and in the second half of the seminar, I will ask questions for the whole panel to discuss. Throughout the whole seminar, we welcome all questions from the audience, and we will read them out throughout the seminar. Tristan, thank you again for joining us today. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your work on meditation and how you think it impacts happiness and fulfillment, and specifically in the context of the VR technology that you are using.
Thank you, Christina, for the question, and thank you for this opportunity to connect with you through Happiness Foundation. It's very exciting to read about you and see your great work. So I've been involved with working in virtual reality and meditation technology since 2016. And in my experience, actually, well, since the year 2000, when I started getting very serious about meditation, meditation is in itself like a form of technology. It's been passed through the ages, many thousands of years, but there seems to be, with every generation, with every new decade or new era, there seems to be new technological tools in meditation that come into play. So it was very interesting in the 60s. Meditation got into the foreground, and in the 70s, well, the Beatles. Speaking of Beatles, I think Anders might like me mentioning Beatles, but Beatles brought an Indian meditation guru to the West, and of course, Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda had come in the 20s, but then in the 60s, there was a new wave of meditation that came through transcendental meditation. And since the 70s, there have been literally increasing numbers of scientific studies every year on the health benefits of meditation, the impact for our mental wellness and our overall wellness. So every year, more and more studies. To this day, there are literally thousands of peer-reviewed scientific studies on the efficacy of meditation to improve our mental, physical, and just well-being in every sense. So meditation is, as I said, kind of like a technology because it evolves and it becomes more sophisticated. And I think for our modern times, we need more powerful tools. So in 2015, I had a vision to bring to the marketplace more progressive, more impactful tools for accessing the profound benefits of meditation, because I felt like my experiences, my most profound experiences in meditation were so striking and almost overwhelming in nature. And how could that even be provided, or how could people access such an incredible experience? That's what I've been obsessed with since the year 2000. Even though my obsession with meditation goes back to my childhood. Actually, my father took me to a meditation when I was 4 years old, and I read the book Siddhartha when I was 9 years old. I lived in Southeast Asia for 2 years when I was a teenager. I read a ton of meditation books, but I got really obsessed in the year 2000 when I went to a 9-day retreat here in Iceland, and I became just, overcome with the vision and the impact of this incredible practice. Of course, that was in long hours of a deep practice, and I was also cradled in Iceland's vast, pure, untouched nature. So that all added to the experience. Okay, long story short, virtual reality. I never thought that virtual reality would be a great tool for meditation, because I thought it would be maybe more of a distraction or more like a toy, or like not quite relevant to the meditation space. I think it takes a stretch of the imagination to go there. But when I was on the top of Mount Everest in VR, I realized that virtual reality could help millions of people learn meditation, because when you're transported to another place. Imagine right now, the four of us that are on this session right now, we could be in VR. We could be on the top of Mount Everest. We could be somewhere together in the same space, and we could be talking or conversing, or we could be meditating. We could do, and it does change things when you're transported to a new place. So we realized with Flow that we could use the tools of combining immersive nature imagery with music and guided meditation to a really high impactful, a new level of impactfulness for meditation. And then so since then we have been delivering meditation programs to large companies in Iceland, and we've been providing banks and energy companies, fashion companies, all kinds of companies here access to short but very transformative meditation experiences, and really coming to the core of what is meditation. It's a journey within. Inside of ourselves is where our courage and our determination, our best qualities, the love that's in our heart, the kindness, the care, all the most wonderful qualities of a human being are within the heart, and that's where meditation takes you, is deeper within, and into realms that are hard to describe, actually. So I don't want to. I mean, like I was talking about when I had my 9-day experience here in Iceland. It opened up a world to me that had been sort of hidden since I was a child. And it reminded me of what it meant for me to have a spiritual nature. And because it's so quickly forgotten, so easy to forget that part of ourselves. When we're children, we're very connected to it. We're very wild and free. And then as we grow older, we get more and more, we put ourselves into these rigid boxes, who we're supposed to be, who we think we are, how society wants us to be, how we think we need to be. And then we kind of, we lose touch with that, the pure essence that we are born with. So meditation takes us back there. But I don't really often talk about those kind of aspects when I'm talking to busy working people. I talk about more like, let's meditate so we can become more calm, more focused, more centered, more able to be creative. The kind of qualities we want to have in our lives to function and to function at our best. But the spiritual aspect is something that I also like to talk about when I'm in more of a flow, like with you guys.
Thank you so much. This has been very, very interesting. I can't wait to hear more about that. David, if I can ask you just a little bit more about your work at Humanity Plus and what you think about what are the technologies that could improve happiness and fulfillment.
Right, yes. I'm a transhumanist, and transhumanists are probably most associated with super longevity and super intelligence, but there's also a third super, and that's the focus of my work, super happiness. And this is the idea that it's going to be possible to phase out the biology of suffering and replace pain and malaise and a traditional signaling system with life based entirely on gradients of intelligent bliss. And thanks to biotechnology, we can now sketch out how this is technically feasible, using everything from pre-implantation genetic screening, counseling, soon CRISPR babies, cultured meat. It's also going to be possible to reprogram the entire biosphere. The level of suffering in the living world is now an adjustable parameter. And if we're actually prepared to use technologies like CRISPR gene editing, base code editing, and critically synthetic gene drives, yes, it's possible to essentially replace today's biology of pain and suffering with something quite sublime. One needs to think about timescales too. What is going to be possible in 5 years, 50 years, and 500 years? Let's just focus on the next few years. I think the most urgent priority is to get factory farms and slaughterhouses shut, because any serious biohappiness revolution is going to extend to all sentient beings. And a pig, for example, a pig he or she is not merely more intelligent than a dog. A pig is more sentient than a dog. A pig is as sentient as a toddler. And what we are doing as a society, as a civilization, to non-human animals is frightful. And so I hope a combination of alternative meat products and soon cultured meat will essentially allow factory farms and slaughterhouses to be outlawed. Anyone, I think, who is planning to have children ought to consider pre-implantation genetic screening and counseling, and very soon even CRISPR. It is now possible, in principle, to choose, let's just start with pain sensitivity, the pain threshold of your future child. There's a so-called volume knob for pain, the SCN9A gene, and I think you have a responsibility as a prospective parent to ensure that your kid has an extremely high pain threshold. There is no volume knob for hedonic tone, but it's going to be possible, if you're a prospective parent, to load the genetic dice in favor of your offspring and ensure that your child has an extremely high hedonic set point. And yes, sorry, the hedonic treadmill is the set of negative feedback mechanisms in the central nervous system that stops most of us being very happy or very sad for long. It's got a very high genetic loading, and we're shortly going to be in a position to actually choose. Looking further ahead, yes, if today our hedonic range, crudely, simplistically, is -10 to 0 to +10, it will be possible to create, thanks to our mastery of our reward circuitry, a civilization of, let's say, +10 to +30, and eventually even a kind of +90 to a +100 super civilization. I'm personally a negative utilitarian. I think our overriding moral obligation is to mitigate, prevent suffering. But yeah, my cautious prediction is that essentially, we're going to have a new architecture of mind based on gradients of intelligent bliss.
Thank you so much. This is very, very interesting. I was just wondering, can you tell me if there are any other targets you're looking at when you are doing or planning to do genetic screening for suffering and fulfillment? Or like what exactly is that you are looking at? Is that one specific target? Or
well, for example, the year 2020, though of course the year of COVID, it's also the year in which the Luxembourg Institute of Health discovered the absolutely critical role of the ACKR3 receptor in regulating endogenous opioids and kind of default hedonic tone. Now, why is it that we've been so unsuccessful as a society in treating depression? Essentially, it's because the neurotransmitter system most directly involved in hedonic tone is the opioid system. And we all know that trying to treat pain, anxiety, depression with opioids has horrendous pitfalls. But the role of the ACK receptor, ACKR3 receptor, essentially is to grab your endogenous opioids and to stop them acting. And it ought, at least in principle, to be possible to raise essentially default hedonic tone, most morally urgently for people susceptible to pain disorders and depression. But in principle, it should be possible to do this with the entire population. I stress this is early days too, but it's actually a very exciting time.
Just one question that has arrived from Raven from the audience. She asked, if pain is an information signal about danger and negative emotion that often occur in response to adverse realities, wouldn't we be blinding ourselves by removing these in genetic screening or CRISPR editing?
Yes, this is a real worry. I mean, it would even now be possible to ensure that all children didn't experience any pain at all. Knockouts of the SCN9A gene completely abolish the experience of pain, but they also abolish nociception. And before going on to really radical stuff involving neuroprostheses and becoming cyborgs or anything, I think the morally urgent priority is to ensure that all kids have an extremely high pain threshold. Now, if you've ever met this kind of elite person who says things like, oh, pain, it's just a useful signaling mechanism. There is tremendous variability of pain tolerance and pain sensitivity. And I think before going on to anything truly radical, like life based on gradients of superhuman bliss or anything like that, essentially we should be assuring that pain really is just a useful signaling mechanism. It doesn't have this total ghastliness that pain does for so many people today. It's much more of a mouthful talking about information-sensitive gradients of well-being rather than just happiness, but it's a critical distinction.
Thank you so much. This has been very, very interesting. And just one quick question to Anders. Can you tell us a bit more about your research and maybe what you think are the specific domains that have the potential or maybe are already improving happiness and fulfillment?
Well, my background is computational neuroscience. I'm a computer scientist who pretends to think that I can say something about the brain by doing neural network simulations. So I got early on very interested in how to enhance the brain, and I've been discussing a lot with David about these questions. Then I ended up at the Future Humanity Institute thinking about long-term futures for humanity and the biggest risks. And that means that these days I'm in the philosophy department. So I'm one of those weird birds that is not quite a philosopher, not quite a computer scientist, not quite a neuroscientist. But I'm interested in this force field between them. So when we think about technologies to make us happy, the philosopher in me will immediately start shouting, wait a minute, happiness is a complicated thing. Well-being is a very thick concept that involves not just that you're smiling and singing, but also that you're comfortable, that you're healthy, that you're feeling meaning, etc. It's a thick and quite complicated concept. That's fine, but we can still kind of recognize it when we see it, and there are technologies that can help us achieve that. There are some that are super specific. You can put an electrode in some parts of the brain and make somebody experience a very pleasant state. It's kind of well known that these experiments were done in the 50s on mice and rats to stimulate them. And the myth says that, oh yes, they wanted to self-stimulate so much that they starved themselves to death and died. That's not really true. But it fits in with a bigger complex that we are kind of often worried about getting too happy for the wrong reasons. And those wrong reasons, I will get back to them very quickly because they are important. It also turns out that many of these brain systems that you get self-stimulation in are not so much about happiness and pleasantness, but instead wanting something. So you can imagine the mouse pressing the button and feeling, oh, what was that? Pressing it again, oh, what was that? And kind of get into this loop of craving. There is a very important distinction, neuroscientists have noticed, between wanting and liking. There are many things that we want, and when we get them, we like getting them. The problem is, of course, as any drug addict can tell you, that the wanting system can get out of hand, and eventually you don't get any pleasant stimuli from taking your drug of choice, but you certainly want it. So doing brain stimulation directly, in theory, you could get perhaps liking without wanting, but it still sounds like a rather complicated thing. On the completely different side, we can try to organize our normal technology. Just think about how we organize our life. Quite a lot of daily annoyances are reducing our well-being for no good reason. I started to train myself, for example, in noticing stuff that annoy me to a mild degree and just fixing them so I'm not annoyed by it. Now, I'm cheating because I'm one of those lucky people who also have a genetically set high happiness set point. It's partially genetic and partially probably just personality and training. And we know there are training methods that do seem to improve well-being and happiness. It's just that genetics seems to be quite powerful. So there is a long spectrum here of ways of making ourselves happy. Some of them are practical, like get your exercise. It's banal, but most of us don't get our exercise anyway. Some of them might involve actually having some happiness coach, whether a human or even an app that helps us find what actually makes us happy. Some of it might be more profound, like meditation and actually figuring out what are your actual goals? What do you actually like about life? Becoming a connoisseur of happiness. And some of them might indeed be various forms of biomedical interventions, whether that is drugs or gene therapy, or having had parents that use the right kind of CRISPR, or maybe getting that lovely optogenetic electrode in the right part of the brain. But the problem is, of course, you want the happiness to be for something too. The fear we have when we think about those mice with electrodes in the brains is not just that somebody else is in control of them, but also they're getting kind of excited for nothing. They're pressing a button, they're getting excited, they want to press it again. And we might joke about the rat race and, oh, I totally want to have that button linked maybe to finishing my academic papers or the stocks in my stock portfolio going up. But the problem is that might not produce a good life. This is where the philosopher comes back again. You want your happiness to be instrumental to seeking out things that are good for you. And this is a profound question, what good for you actually means, if anything. It might be that it just is pleasure. But most people and most philosophers would say, yeah, there are higher forms of pleasure. There is a difference between an orgasm and the sense of accomplishment of actually getting up on Mount Everest. There are interesting questions about what about fake pleasures? Well, the rat seems to be getting a fake pleasure from pressing a button. What about virtual reality? Is that fake or real? And here, quite a lot of people get very confused because they might say virtual reality is not real reality, so nothing in virtual reality matters, which I think is wrong. There are many things in fake reality, like literature and art, that matters very profoundly. Yet, it is paint on paper. It is things on a television screen. So my work is very much about what can we say about the true sources of what we find value in. And then, of course, what trajectories can mankind take to get as much of that as is possible and avoid the risk of spreading suffering to the universe?
That is amazing. Thank you. Just one quick question. When you were talking about this kind of philosophical approach towards fulfillment and a bit of a higher form of happiness, is it possible to use technology to kind of explore what it could mean to be fulfilled or to explore these philosophical questions?
I think so. The traditional philosophical method has consisted of thinking about stuff and talking about it and writing about it. But actually having a real experience quite often profoundly changes how you think about that thing. There are many philosophers of parenthood, but I mainly trust the ones that are actual parents. And I think similarly, we have technologies that can put our brains and bodies in various states. And I think we should. I think it actually is an important thing to explore the limits of experience quite a bit more than we can, especially if it's possible to do safely. It's one thing if you need to go on a dangerous shamanic quest and take some very risky drugs to have a deep mystical experience. That might not be for everybody and might actually be quite risky. On the other hand, if you can package it in a useful way, maybe it's not going to have quite the same oomph and the same kind of ritual importance, but it might also be possible to do on a larger scale. And I do think we should recognize that even if people just become slightly more happy, if everybody becomes slightly more happy, that has a profound network effect. I'm from Stockholm, which is a bipolar city. In winter, it's dark and people are not smiling. And since you tend to not smile if people are not smiling, it's a pretty depressing place. up until somewhere in spring. The sun starts being bright, somebody starts smiling, others start smiling back, and suddenly it's a warm and friendly place, and it keeps on doing that until autumn gets really dark again. We have this network effect, and I think it's important to recognize that it's not just my happiness. I'm reflecting others' happiness, and we might work hard on building our technological tools that help us reflect happiness on each other.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all three of you for your amazing, all your amazing work and all the insightful talks that you gave on them. I would now like to welcome everyone for the second half of the seminar, where we will change the format up a little bit, and I will ask questions to one of you on the panel, but it is very much an open discussion, and everyone can feel free to jump in, and also there might be some questions coming in from the audience as well. I'll start by asking Tristan. So technology use has been escalating. It has provided us with innumerable benefits, but one can argue that we are not really getting happier. What do you think? Why is that happening, or how can we fix it?
Well, I agree with you. I think part of the reason why I started to work on flow was because I struggled, and I do still struggle with keeping a balance between my life on the screen, my work, and a connection to nature, and just being physical and being involved in my day-to-day relationships and physical being. So, you know, I think everyone is involved in that struggle, and I don't think that COVID has helped. I think it's brought it more to the surface, made it more obvious that people feel, you know, maybe isolated. There's so much time on a screen, and then how can you connect with everybody around the world? You can't go to a party, everyone's not hugging, dancing, you know, there's a lot of things that aren't happening like normal. So, and now we're very much spending a lot of screen time, and that could also impact our sleep. And so technology is causing stress, without a doubt. Screen time, time on the phone for the kids. I mean, these kids are like, they're kind of like an experiment. No kids have ever had these devices and had such exposure to screens and to radiation and all the kinds of things. It's really beyond comprehension. But so in my mind, like, technology is taking a big toll, but that's why we need to harness technology. We need to get a hold of it. We need to learn to control it for our benefit. And that's why I think it's important to put love and put care into technology, create design and create experiences that enhance our happiness and well-being. Like flow, for example. There are also many other examples of new interventions that are happening in this area, whether it's the meditation mobile apps or whether it's virtual reality experiences that help people to mitigate anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder, or all kinds of, there's lots of innovation happening in this area. It's very exciting. So as I said before, you know, on your first computer science class, you'll probably learn the term garbage in, garbage out. I remember that back in the day in my first class in high school. Well, I thought to myself, but then if you put love in, love out, you know, you can increase the love on a scalable level. And that's our mission with flow, is to increase the love on the planet through meditation, through connection. And I think that in our hearts, you know, that's kind of where it all comes down to. So the answer is love. And it's not an easy thing to achieve, to put it into the technology, because it feels a bit like chalk and cheese. But it's what everyone is ultimately striving for when it comes down to it, I think.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have anything to add to this topic from either Anders or David?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how do you put love into technology? And the answer is, of course, the design. If you're a really good designer, you can structure how we interact with technology in a very clever, creative, and quite often beautiful way. The problem is design is darn hard to do. I certainly know I can't do it. I can recognize good design when I see it sometimes, but when I'm trying my hand at making things, it's very hard. And this is, of course, a real challenge because we're going to need a lot of interdisciplinary work to make technology that it's possible to put love. And some of it is going to be on the technological level. Some of it is going to be the social level. How do you structure the community around the technology so it actually creates happiness?
It's true, and design is key, and it can be considered a dark art, as all arts, I guess, on some level. But like, if you go deep enough into whatever it is you're delivering, like with meditation, you want to go so deep into what is the core and how to how just it just takes, I think that's what it takes. It takes hours and hours and hours and hours of dedication. It takes, like with any great music or great artwork or anything, you need to just put the time in and have a vision. And that's something that, it's not an easy thing to achieve, but everybody's doing it in their own way. Like, everyone has their role to play in that. For me, I made a decision in 2014 to dedicate my life to meditation. And then, that would be the one thing that I would put my energy into. And that was after I lost my father. So it came from, having a heartbreak and experiencing a great loss. And then, but out of that came a new beginning for me. And I mean, it's a matter of focus and desire and just persistence, staying with it, and that's kind of like we all have that, like, deep inside of ourselves, that grit to stick with what it is that we feel is our mission. I think we all share that here on this call. We all have like a bigger vision and purpose.
Definitely, this has been a very, very insightful discussion. I would direct my next question to David. So technology is often criticized for fostering short attention spans, decision fatigue, but also there are technologies that actually do the opposite, like cognitive enhancement or increasing self-compassions or helping us make decisions. Can you tell us a bit more about these latter sorts of technologies and how they compare to the well-known, like, short attention span, decision fatigue effects?
Oh, good heavens. I mean, there aren't any complete all-round cognitive enhancers. There are particular drugs that can modestly improve, for example, performance on, let's say, IQ tests. But IQ tests measure only one particular kind of cognition, a kind of mind-blind autistic component of general intelligence. And if one wants to enrich our capacity for empathy, cooperative, problem-solving, perspective-taking, one is going to be looking at a different kind of cognitive enhancer. And I suspect when most people think of nootropics cognitive enhancers, they're thinking of a very narrow set of abilities, whereas I would hope that we're going to be able to develop full spectrum superintelligence, and this is going to involve enhancing our capacity for social cognition. I mean, we're talking about love now. Consider the so-called the hug drug, MDMA, ecstasy. Sadly, it's potentially neurotoxic, so one can't advocate its mass use. But nonetheless, while people are on MDMA, essentially everyone loves everyone else and they want to hug each other. Unfortunately, most of us, most of the time, even if we practice loving kindness, meditational discipline, that kind of stuff, are simply biologically, genetically not capable of that kind of response. Yet if we are prepared to use biotech, optogenetics, designer drugs, and so on, it would be possible, and this I said this is more kind of medium to long term, to create a society in which we genuinely do love each other. But given the way we're designed at the moment, I'm afraid this is sadly a bit of a pipe dream. It will be much harder to create a society in which everyone behaves in a loving manner towards everyone else than it will be simply to ratchet up hedonic range and hedonic set points.
It's also worth thinking about that question from the perspective of current technology. We are complaining that our social media are making us polarized and angry, and our attention spans are becoming very short because we're filling our time with various media and lots of windows. And all of these ones, of course, design problems. I actually really loved the first smartphones because the app system meant that you're doing one thing at a time on the phone rather than my normal state of having 20 different windows open for 20 different tasks and then jumping randomly between them. Now, things might have changed there, but you can design system to reduce the fostering of short attention spans. It's possible to use social media to actually connect to people instead of just getting upset about political enemies. And I think one of the interesting things about MDMA and some of the other drugs that affect empathy is not so much that they make you more empathic. They make you want to be empathic, but then you try to actually relate to people. And that training is, of course, the important part because a drug doesn't contain that much information. So we might want to engineer situations and software, whether that is a windowing system or computer that doesn't split our attention, or situations that actually allow us to, in a practical manner, learn how to emphasize, which might be in virtual reality. I play role-playing games myself, which is very fun to try to take perspectives of different characters and try to see how they would react. If we can create good social institutions around this, I think we can win quite a lot in happiness.
Just one question that actually I would have about the MDMA and optogenetics and drugs. So especially with when we're talking about drugs, it is easy for one to think about Brave New World and Soma and all the thoughts about actually humanity adapting to technology instead of technology serving humanity. With these very, very powerful techniques that you were mentioning, David, would there be any way that one can make sure that it would be technology in the use of humanity and having more controlled effects to not having to have humanity adapting to technology, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so critics can't make up whether Brave New World is a utopia or a dystopia. Personally, I find the idea of Soma rather wonderful. I mean, okay, it's not kind of deep and spiritual, but yes, a happiness drug. But yes, many people are aghast at the idea. But nonetheless, a more general point about society is that other things being equal, creating happier people creates more active citizens. And this is the inversion of the Huxleyan model in which happiness is associated with being docile. Low mood, depression, social anxiety is associated with subordination and defeat. Whereas if you create essentially a society of happy people, you're creating a society of active citizens, other things being equal. And of course, the society in which people aren't docile, there could be many problems there too. In the world controller in Huxley's Brave New World, I think, is asked why not make everyone alphas, and says, well, actually, an experiment in which everyone was an alpha was tried, and then there was civil war between all the alphas in Cyprus. Yeah, so I'm not claiming that actually raising people's happiness and making people more active citizens is a panacea, but that is a more likely effect, I would say.
Yes, I think that would link to one question that actually we just got in the chat from Daniel Boros, which is how do you think we can make sure that all these new technologies would promote global happiness instead of becoming a commodity of individual happiness for the like 1% or the rich?
Well, part of it is probably that you want volume sales, not margin sales. That is, if you can make money by selling only to billionaires, in that case, you're going to sell to billionaires. But most of the very rich people in the world are not becoming very rich by selling stuff to the fellow billionaires. They're getting very rich by selling it to everybody. Indeed, making a lot of people happy seems to be good business. And if I were a democratic government that actually cared about citizens, I would also want these active, happy citizens. If I was a more authoritarian government, I might want actually mildly depressed, pliable citizens. But a lot of this has to do with the scaling of how do you do this thing. If happiness happened after very long training, then very few people can afford it in terms of money and time. If it's a simple pill, then you can probably make it cheap enough that everybody can afford it. So I think one of the challenges to us who want to figure out new technologies of happiness is to make it scalable. So this is getting to that question. Can we make the benefits of meditation happen more quickly with a lower threshold that would be accessible for all?
This has been very, very insightful. Thank you. Another question. Sorry, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that with Flow, what we've created it's really for people, busy working people, normal people, not for rich people. It's not priced like that. It's not aimed for a rich audience. I don't know if it gave you that impression. I hope not. And I don't know. I feel like, how do you make sure that it's not that? Is just by, marketing it for people, not for just like an elite, wealthy crowd, and pricing it for people, not so it's not exclusive. Yeah, that's all I can say about that.
I guess like one question that arrived for you, Tristan, as well, is from Anais Kelly that was exactly asking, she was wondering how do we scale meditation and love that you were mentioning to deliver it effectively to the masses across the world and cultures?
Thank you. I think it's a lot about access. So that's why we're using the mobile app technology, because everybody nowadays has a mobile app, even just all around the world, every corner of the world, people have it, even in remote villages, people have mobile phones. And then with Flow, we're planning to have many languages and many meditation leaders in different regions. So that's our plan, a global plan for that. The virtual reality market is emerging still. There's still just a few million headsets, but we plan to keep growing our VR part of our platform initially for corporate, busy working people, but eventually as VR technology becomes more widespread, cheaper, more affordable. In fact, in China, they have a headset that's just very low cost and it looks just like a pair of sunglasses. So, I mean, it's becoming more for everybody as time passes. Every year, it's going to be more and more accessible. So we'll have a lot of great content, this meditation content for those VR platforms as they expand. Thanks for that question.
Thank you for the answer. It sounds amazing. And as we're talking about more global problems and global risk, I'd like to ask you, Anders, as we are in nowadays seeing an increased awareness to existential risks like climate change and see a lot of pessimism about the future and like climate change anxiety, would there be any ways of using technologies to mitigate exactly either these risks or just to feel purposeful as opposed to very helpless about the future?
The problem is that the feeling you have about global risks might be very uncorrelated to the actual risk. So right now, many people are feeling very depressed about climate change, even though we're doing amazingly well on renewable energy. the development of solar panels has been simply astonishing. I believed I was a techno-optimist, and then I realized that I was far too pessimistic about solar and wind, which is kind of surprising. And it's also interesting to notice that most people don't really take it in, because they still want to believe that there is a disaster in the making, and there might still be, because we have plenty of other problems. But the interesting thing is that feeling of helplessness, I think it's also something that moves around. So if we solved climate change tomorrow, I think many people would then project their helplessness on the next thing. Maybe pandemics, maybe artificial intelligence, maybe something completely random. The real problem is kind of psychological. We are not used to, we are not evolved to live in vast societies dealing with very big problems that involve very complex solutions. We want the kind of problems that you could handle in a Stone Age tribe. We kind of get them. We're built for handling that. And we get somewhat frustrated when the actual solution is to moving some numbers around so millions of people in faraway countries do complicated things. That's not really what we normally adapt to. I think in the long run we need to find better ways of doing that, but I think we also need to figure out the emotional solution, because fear of the future, quite often it's comfort in saying, oh, everything's going to end anyway, I don't need to care. That saves you from the risk of caring. And generally people who are pessimistic about the future, they don't do very much for safeguarding it. And indeed, if the future looks dark, there is no reason to make it come about. On the other hand, optimists like me, we say, oh, the future could be amazing, so we better save it. And of course, we're also optimistic about our own ability to push things. Now, that might sometimes be totally unrealistic. But of course, that unrealistic bias towards acting and actually trying to fix things means that stuff actually does get fixed. You don't see civilization being built by pessimists very much. So I think when it comes to global and existential risks, the pandemic is a good example where we both did amazing things, not just in terms of making vaccines and the reorganizing part of the economy and society to an enormous degree, much faster than I believe was possible, but also totally failed at other parts of governance. But if we can learn those lessons, we can apply them. But I do think we need to recognize that a lot of our fear and doubts about the future have very little to do with the actual content of the future, but much more that we are kind of filled with fear and doubt. I might not have answered the question, though, about how the technology could fix this, but maybe the others can get involved here.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask, because you mentioned that, well, we are not really evolved to live in these global societies. I wanted to ask, do you think, is there any way that humanity can adapt to it in the long run?
I think a lot of it is habit. You do get used to your social environment, even if it's something your ancestors in the Neolithic would have found totally alien. But I think we can help each other. We can construct institutions and networks and safeguards that exist on various levels. So I know that if I'm feeling down, of course I have my friends, and even though we're not physically here, they're only a few milliseconds away across the internet. There are ways of creating social groups online that can be good. We might want to develop a meditation techniques and apps, so I can find the emotional fulfillment. But I think we also need to seriously consider, could we construct better institutions on various levels? Right now, we have been left with a bunch of institutions that came around through history, from the past politics, and many of them are not very adapted for our purposes. We should start inventing institutions for our purposes, and then link them with technology so they're useful. I think Wikipedia is a beautiful example of how one can do this. It took one institution, the encyclopedia, and updated it slightly, and then did something that is pure genius to make everybody more or less an editor. And they managed to tune it right, so you rapidly could actually get essentially the sum total of humanity's knowledge in there, and it's still self-stabilizing. I'm constantly annoyed by things not being as good as they could be, but it's so much better than any of the traditional encyclopedias. I think we should aspire to make the Wikipedia of happiness.
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea. Can the Happiness Foundation please make that happen and we can all contribute?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be amazing.
A happiness encyclopedia, yes.
Yeah.
We need that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it might not just consist of knowledge about happiness, but also the tools or even elements that they give us happiness. So there is an interesting opportunity here for creating something really new.
Definitely. We didn't know that we were going to invent something new in this meeting.
The best kind of meeting.
Exactly, exactly. Just one question for you, David, linking back to boosting happiness. So is it a feasible goal? I know it might be a broad question for people to be happy all the time. So if we are having these sorts of hedonistic adaptations with reducing pain sensitivity, is there a way we can account for that? So for example, like food tastes like better when you are hungry, but no one really wants like negative emotions. Is there a way we can like account for these hedonistic adaptations? Or is that a risk in these technologies?
Essentially, I mean, tragically, there are some people who are chronically in pain and depressed, and essentially, in the course of their life, they just do not go above hedonic zero. If their signaling system breaks down altogether, which sometimes happens, they can be hospitalized in cases of learned helplessness, behavioral despair. But there are tragically a large number of so-called high-functioning depressives who go through life animated by gradients of essentially ill-being. At the other extreme, there are people like Anders, who essentially goes through most of his life animated by information-sensitive gradients of well-being, and essentially evolution just plays with the dials. Other things being equal, essentially giving someone a high hedonic set point, it's a kind of high risk, high reward strategy. Having a high hedonic set point is associated with exploratory behavior, adventure, but yeah, you're more likely in an adverse environment, something bad will happen to you. Whereas if you're a depressive, you're more likely to keep your head down. And yeah, as a society, I think we ought to be aiming to create a hypothalamic civilization. Anders is associated with this wonderful quote, I do have a ridiculously high hedonic set point. He was prompted to say this, as Anders does not go around telling people. I'm guessing that it's just simply part of the fabric of reality if you're lucky enough to be blessed with this high hedonic set point. But of course, there are a very large number of people who aren't so blessed, and you know, most people, they spend most of their life fluctuating either a little above or a little below hedonic zero. But we want to give everyone a benign range, and yeah, essentially one can enjoy things so much more if one has this default hedonic tone that is much higher. It doesn't mean to say that one is undiscerning. On the contrary, one can still have the functional analogues of all the nasty stuff, but they're not the kind of the nasty raw feels in the same way. Anders, sorry if you can comment here because you're better qualified.
Well, I have this weird inside perspective because yes, I do really feel very happy most of the time, which was somewhat embarrassing when I was officiating a funeral a few months back. That was tricky. Of course, I could comfort the grieving people quite well, but it was also slightly tricky not to smile too much when standing there and preaching. So the interesting problem is, of course, you want flexibility about the right things. And you can do that maybe by intellectually figuring things out or having alternative emotions. The fear I think many people have is that either you become very flat, you're always smiling and nothing changes, which might also imply that you don't get any depth. So if you want to get some darkness for your artwork, it's very hard to get. I think that is overrated. But I think the real fear people have is, of course, yeah, you're just going to be sitting in a corner being content. That's not true, because happiness do drive you to do stuff. My problem is instead, I have a million projects going on. I'm not in a maniac state where I'm doing a million things that cannot possibly work, but I'm having so many delightful projects that it's hard to choose. I would delight to have some little boss app on my phone that was somehow gently directing me towards what I should prioritize right now, because that would probably improve my life further. But there are trade-offs. And I think being able to select trade-offs and being able to select your happiness level in an appropriate manner is super important. The sad thing right now is most people can't. They're stuck there. I'm always delighted when somebody learns the concept of hangry and they realize, oh yes, if I'm feeling that, if I take some food, I'm just going to be much nicer and I get out of that bad state. This is an everyday thing that surprisingly many people don't know happened to them. And it's so nice that you can tell them about it and they can even fix it. But we should aim at doing something bigger than that.
I think linking to that, I wanted to ask that a few studies have shown already that the purpose in life is actually what determines life satisfaction and well-being. And would there be a way for technology to interact with this to help you find purpose in life or get you closer to that? If either of you wants to jump in on that.
I think it can be. It's going to take the focus. We need to put our focus there, and make it the purpose to live in the purpose. And it's going to be. We have to strive for that, because the way the system is designed is to sort of distract us from the purpose. For me personally, I feel like nature has a lot to offer to us in terms of finding our purpose again, connecting. There's a Shakespeare quote a friend shared with me just yesterday it was just from a tea, a cup of tea, the tag on the tea. It said from Shakespeare, "One touch of nature makes the whole world kin." And nature is so brilliantly designed. I mean, it made all of us, and the way we can think, the way we can imagine, the way we can, create, and everything we do comes out of our nature individually. But I wonder if we. I mean, I do believe that we need to work with nature, and we need to design our designs to enhance our happiness and purpose and all of that. But I'm also wondering how much as a humanity we try to control nature, and is that going to take us into more happiness or more disconnection?
That is very, very insightful. Thank you so much. As we're getting to the end of the seminar, unfortunately, we do have to wrap up. But I would like to thank you very much for all three of you for sharing all your insights and providing us with a truly fantastic discussion on the past, present, and future of technology and happiness, and also within inventing the happiness encyclopedia, something quite unexpected at the beginning of this discussion. It's been truly amazing, and thank you again. And also, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, for asking questions, engaging with this insightful discussion. If anyone is interested in hearing more about the future of happiness, I would like to invite you to join us for the second installment of these monthly seminar series. It's going to take place in the last week of June. And if you'd like to hear more about our work and the work of the Happiness Foundation on how to reimagine human happiness and fulfillment using economics, technological systems, and artificial intelligence, please look at our website, solvehappy.org, or follow us on this YouTube channel here, where we will stream all of our seminars as well. And thank you again for everyone for coming today, and hopefully see you soon at the next seminar.
Thank you.
Thank you.